The question hung in the air, a perfect little grenade of social disbelief tossed casually across the table at our own rehearsal dinner. It came from Jessica, my maid of honor and a friend since kindergarten, who had always championed my happiness, albeit through a very specific, conventional lens. "I'm just so glad you finally found your person, Ellie," she said, her voice genuine but her eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Confusion? Pity? "I just never would have pictured you and Leo. From high school, I mean. It's just so unexpected." There it was. The word that had followed us since we went public as a couple. Unexpected. My own mother had used it. A few of my cousins had whispered it. It was the polite way of saying, him? The quiet kid from the back of the classroom? The one who never spoke, never went to parties, never even seemed to exist in our social orbit? "You're marrying him?" I looked across the table at Leo. He was talking to my father, his expression calm and engaged. He wasn't a loud man. His presence didn't fill a room with booming laughter or charismatic anecdotes. Instead, it created a center of gravity, a quiet, steady point around which everything else felt more stable, more real. He must have felt my gaze because he glanced over and gave me a small, knowing smile. That smile held more reassurance and love than any grand declaration I had ever received from any other man. I turned back to Jessica, my own smile firm. Unexpected? No, Jess. It was inevitable. It just took me a decade to catch up to the inevitable. She blinked, taken aback by my certainty. The rest of the table quieted, sensing a moment of significance. They saw Leo, the successful software architect, the kind and attentive man sitting before them. But in their minds, they were still overlaying that image with a ghost from the past, the invisible boy we all went to school with. The boy none of them, including me, ever gave a second thought. They saw a narrative that didn't make sense, a princess who, for some reason, chose the stable boy instead of the prince. They had no idea that the stable boy had been the king all along. But how did we get here? How did I go from being the girl who dated the quarterback to marrying the boy whose name I barely knew? Let me start from the beginning. High school was a world defined by visibility. You were either seen or you were not. I was seen. Not because I was the head cheerleader or the prom queen, but because I was adjacent to it all. I was pretty enough, friendly enough, and dated the right kinds of guys. My circle was the loud one in the cafeteria, the one that organized the weekend parties, the one that set the unspoken social rules. Life was a current, and I was content to float along in its strongest, most popular channel. And in that world, Leo was a ghost. His name was Leo Vance. I knew this only because his name was occasionally called for attendance. He sat 2 rows behind me in trigonometry for a full year. He had brown hair. That's it. That's all I could have told you about him. He wasn't bullied, because to be bullied, you have to be noticed first. He was something far more profound in the cruel hierarchy of high school. He was irrelevant. He'd walk down the hallway with his head slightly down, a book in his hand, and people's eyes would slide right past him, as if he were a part of the beige locker bank. He ate lunch at a small table in the corner with 2 other quiet boys who were equally invisible. They never caused trouble. They never made a scene. They simply existed in the margins. My boyfriend at the time was a guy named Mark Renner. Mark was the opposite of a ghost. He was a firework. He was the star of the basketball team, charming, loud, and handsome in that effortless way that makes teenagers lose their minds. He drove a slightly beat-up, but cool, convertible. And when he walked down the hall, people didn't just see him, they orbited him. I was one of them. Being his girlfriend was a status symbol. It meant I was chosen, I was important, I was visible. I remember one specific moment in the library. I was struggling with a calculus problem, and Mark was across the table, trying to charm the librarian into forgiving his overdue fees. I was frustrated, on the verge of giving up. I saw Leo sitting alone at a computer terminal a few feet away, typing intently. He wasn't looking at me, but for a split second, I had the absurd thought of asking him for help. The quiet kids were always smart, right? But the thought was gone as quickly as it came. What would I even say? More importantly, what would Mark say? What would people think? It was social suicide to bridge the gap between our worlds. So I closed my textbook, sighed, and let Mark drive me home, the problem unsolved. That was the extent of my interaction with Leo in 4 years of sharing the same hallways, a non-event, a choice not made. I graduated, Mark and I went to different colleges and broke up within a year, and the entire population of Northwood High scattered to the winds. I never thought about Leo Vance again. Life after high school did not go as planned. The popular current I had so easily floated on dissipated into the vast, indifferent ocean of the real world. I got my degree in marketing, landed a decent job at a large corporation, and dated a series of men who were all, in their own ways, echoes of Mark. They were charismatic, ambitious, and looked good on paper. They were exciting. And one by one, they were disappointing. There was the investment banker who was emotionally unavailable, the artist who was charmingly unreliable, and the lawyer who was so focused on winning that he treated our relationship like a courtroom debate. I was 28, feeling adrift and a little broken after my latest breakup, when I was sent to a multi-day tech conference in a different city. My company was rolling out a new analytics platform, and I needed to understand it. I spent the first day in a series of mind-numbingly boring sessions, surrounded by people who spoke in acronyms I didn't understand. On the second day, I was in a workshop about data integration. The presenter was a man whose back was to the audience as he configured something on the main screen. He spoke clearly, his voice calm and measured, explaining a complex process with an ease that made it sound simple. He had a way of anticipating our questions before we even asked them. When he finally turned around to face us, my brain took a moment to compute. It was Leo Vance. He looked different, but fundamentally the same. He had filled out, his shoulders broader. He wore a simple, well-fitting button-down shirt. The biggest change was his posture. He stood straight, confident. He wasn't the boy who tried to shrink into the background anymore. He was an expert in his field, and he knew it. His eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting second, they met mine. There wasn't a flicker of recognition, and why would there be? I was just another face in his past, part of the scenery he had been trained to ignore. After the session, I felt an impulse I couldn't explain. The same impulse I'd had in the library a decade ago, but this time, there were no social consequences to hold me back. I went up to him as he was packing his laptop. "Leo? Leo Vance?" He looked up, a polite, professional smile on his face. "Yes?" "Hi, I'm Ellie Cartwright. We went to high school together. Northwood." His smile faltered for a second. I saw him mentally scanning his memory banks, trying to place me. "Oh, right. Ellie, I remember." The fact that it took him a moment was humbling. I had been so central to my own high school story, but I was just a footnote in his. "Your presentation was amazing," I said genuinely. "You made it make sense, which is more than I can say for anyone else here." A real warm smile finally broke through. "Thanks. I'm glad it was helpful." It was awkward for a moment. We were two strangers who shared 4 years of proximity without a single real conversation. "So, you do this for a living?" I asked, gesturing vaguely at the conference hall. "Something like that," he said. "I'm an architect for the company that built this platform. I help companies integrate it." We ended up getting coffee. The conversation that followed was a revelation. The quiet, invisible boy was gone. In his place was a man who was thoughtful, incredibly intelligent, and had a dry, witty sense of humor that took me by surprise. He talked about his work with a passion I envied. He asked me about my life with a genuine curiosity that made me feel truly seen, in a way I hadn't with men who were supposed to be experts in charm. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was just connecting. We discovered we lived only an hour apart. We exchanged numbers with a vague promise to keep in touch. I walked away from that coffee feeling a strange sense of cognitive dissonance. How could the person I just spent an hour with be the same person I had spent 4 years ignoring? We started talking. First it was texts about the conference follow-up. Then it became texts about a book he recommended. Then it became long phone calls about nothing and everything. I found myself looking forward to his name popping up on my screen more than anyone else's. He was the most dependable person I had ever met. If he said he would call at 8, my phone rang at 8 o'clock, not 8:15. When I mentioned in passing that my computer was acting up, He sent me a detailed, step-by-step guide on how to fix it. They were small things, but my life had been filled with men who made grand promises and failed on the small, crucial details. Leo was the opposite. He made no grand promises. He just delivered, consistently. Our first real date was a few weeks later. He drove the hour to my city and suggested we go to a museum. I remembered dates with Mark, which were always about being seen at a popular restaurant or a big party. A date with Leo was about sharing an experience. He'd point out some small detail in a painting, connecting it to a piece of history or a scientific concept, and suddenly the art felt more alive. During that date, I told him about my recent breakup, the one with the lawyer who argued every point into the ground. I was trying to be lighthearted about it, but the hurt was still there. Leo didn't give me platitudes like, "You're better off," or "his loss." He just listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "It sounds like he made you feel like you constantly had to defend your own feelings." I stopped in the middle of the museum gallery. "Yes," I said, the single word carrying a mountain of weight. "That's exactly it." No one had ever understood it so precisely. He didn't just hear my words, he understood the emotional truth beneath them. In that moment, something shifted in me. I wasn't just intrigued by him anymore. I was starting to feel a profound sense of safety. But then, the crisis came. My dad had a heart attack. The call came late on a Tuesday night from my mom, her voice tight with panic. I drove the 2 hours to my parents' home in a haze of fear. For the next week, my world shrank to the size of a hospital waiting room. My friends were great. They sent texts. They called. "Let us know if you need anything," they all said. But the offer was vague, an abstract concept of support. I didn't know what I needed. I just needed the world to stop spinning. On the third day, after a sleepless night in a hard plastic chair, I was at my lowest point. My mom was with my dad, and I was alone, trying to field calls from concerned relatives while holding back tears. My phone buzzed. It was Leo. "Hey," I answered, my voice hoarse. "I'm in the lobby of the hospital," he said, no preamble. "I brought you a change of clothes from your apartment and some real food. Tell me where to meet you." I was stunned into silence. I hadn't even told him which hospital I was at. He had figured it out. He hadn't asked, "Do you need anything?" He saw the need, and he met it. He had driven over 2 hours to bring me a toothbrush and a sandwich. When I met him in the lobby, he didn't offer a dramatic hug or a speech. He just handed me the bag and a container of soup. "Go get some rest," he said. "I'll wait here. If your mom needs a ride or anything, I can handle it. Just for a few hours." For the next week, he was my rock. He showed up every other day. He'd sit with me in silence when I didn't want to talk. He'd make me laugh with a stupid observation when he could tell I was about to break. He handled logistics, fielding calls from my work, managing my frantic texts to my siblings. He never once made it about himself. He never acted like he was doing me a favor. He was just there, solid, unwavering. My dad pulled through. He was going to be okay. The day he was moved out of the ICU, Leo drove me home. As we pulled into my driveway, I was overwhelmed with a feeling so powerful it was almost painful. It was a mix of gratitude, relief, and something deeper. He walked me to the door. Before I could say thank you, I just looked at him, at this man who had quietly and competently held my world together when it was falling apart. This man who was once invisible to me. "Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between us. I saw a flash of shock in his eyes, followed by something I recognized from high school, a hint of that old insecurity, the disbelief that he could be the object of this kind of attention. "Ellie," he started, shaking his head slightly, "you're going through a lot right now. You don't have to—" "No," I cut him off, stepping closer. "This has nothing to do with what I'm going through. This has to do with who you are. I see you, Leo. I really see you." He searched my face, and whatever he saw there must have convinced him. The doubt in his eyes faded, replaced by a gentle, dawning warmth. He didn't say it back right away. He didn't have to. He just reached out, his hand cupping my cheek, and the feeling of his touch was like a final, quiet confirmation. It was home. Our relationship grew from there, easily and naturally. Being with Leo was like exhaling after holding your breath for years. There was no drama, no games, no second guessing. There was just respect, kindness, and that incredible, unwavering dependability. But the outside world still saw the ghost. When I told Jessica I was dating Leo Vance, her first response was a confused, "Who?" I had to explain. "You know, from trig class, quiet guy, sat in the back." "Oh," she said, the single syllable dripping with judgment. "Okay, well, as long as you're happy." My mother was even more direct. "He seems nice, honey. A little on the quiet side, though. Are you sure you won't get bored? You've always been with such vibrant men." Vibrant. It was a euphemism for selfish and unreliable. The pressure was subtle but constant. My friends would try to set me up with other people, even after we were serious. Old classmates would comment on our social media pictures with things like, "Wow, never saw that coming." Every comment felt like a small cut, a reminder that our love story didn't fit their preconceived narrative. I struggled with it more than I cared to admit. A part of me, the part that was still that high school girl who cared about what everyone thought, felt a pang of shame. Was I settling? Was I making a mistake? The final test came about a year into our relationship. I had been working on a massive project at work, a campaign I had poured my heart and soul into for months. It was my chance to get a promotion I desperately wanted. The night before the final presentation to our biggest client, my computer crashed. Everything, the presentation, the data, the notes, was gone. My backup had failed. It was a complete catastrophe. I called Leo, sobbing, a hysterical wreck. I was talking about quitting my job, about being a failure. Mark, or any of the others, would have offered empty platitudes, or, worse, gotten frustrated with my emotional state. Leo just said, "Okay, breathe, I'm on my way." He arrived an hour later with a bag of diagnostic tools and a calm expression. For the next 8 hours, he sat on my living room floor, taking my laptop apart piece by piece. He didn't speak much, he just worked, methodical and focused. I sat on the couch, watching him, my panic slowly subsiding, replaced by a sense of awe. He wasn't just fixing a computer, he was rebuilding my confidence, my career, my sanity, with his quiet competence. At 4 a.m., with the sun just beginning to hint at the horizon, the screen flickered to life. My files were there. He had recovered everything. He looked up at me, his face tired, but his eyes bright. "There you go," he said softly. I started crying again, but this time from sheer, overwhelming love and gratitude. He stood up, came over to the couch, and just held me. "You didn't have to do that," I whispered into his shoulder. "Yes, I did," he said, his voice firm. "You were in trouble. That's what you do for the person you love." In that moment, all the doubts, all the whispers from friends and family, all the ghosts of high school, vanished. Who cared if he wasn't the life of the party? Who cared if he didn't have a flashy smile or a booming voice? His love wasn't loud, it was effective, it was real. It showed up at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. It rebuilt things when they were broken. It was the strongest, most vibrant force I had ever known. Which brings me back to the rehearsal dinner. I looked at Jessica, and then my gaze swept around the table at the faces of the people I loved, the people who were still trying to reconcile the past with the present. "You know," I said, my voice clear and steady. "In high school, we valued the wrong things. We valued being loud, being popular, being seen. We thought that was strength, but we were wrong." I looked over at Leo, who was now watching me, a look of profound love on his face. Real strength isn't loud. It's the person who shows up when your world is falling apart. It's the person who listens not just to your words, but to your silence. It's the person who believes in you so completely that they'll stay up all night to save your dream. The world overlooked Leo in high school. To be honest, I overlooked him too. And it was the single biggest mistake of my life. It took me 10 years to realize that the quietest man in the room was the only one worth listening to. A silence fell over the table. Jessica's eyes were filled with tears. She finally understood. I raised my glass. "So, no, Jess. Marrying him isn't unexpected. It's the smartest, luckiest, and best decision I have ever made. I'm not just marrying the man I love. I'm marrying the best man I have ever known." The next day, I walked down the aisle, my eyes locked on his. The world was full of loud, flashy, temporary things, but I had found something quiet, permanent, and true. Society tells you to go for the fireworks, the grand gestures, the story that looks good from the outside. But I learned that the best love stories aren't written in the headlines. They're built in the quiet moments, in the steadfast presence of someone who was there all along, waiting patiently to be seen. And I will spend the rest of my life being thankful that I finally opened my eyes.